Hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to my garden. I hope you'll join me today as I show you from scratch right here, step by step, how to grow your own delicious organic sweet corn in the garden. You can grow a lot of it in a considerably small amount of space, and it costs a lot less per ear than what you can find at the grocery store. I'm also excited to tell you about the one thing I think you'll find really surprising about garden sweet corn if you grow your own. Growing up and living the majority of my life in the Midwest, sweet corn was a summertime staple. But as an adult, I found that finding organic sweet corn was a bit of a challenge, even in the Midwest. After moving to South Carolina, sweet corn alone, whether organic or not, is harder to find at the store than it was in the Midwest. So I decided to try growing my own sweet corn in my garden here in South Carolina starting 10 years ago. I tried to grow it in the native soil, which I amended, and I've tried to grow it in raised beds, and I've learned a lot throughout the years. It's really been the past 5 or 6 years that I've been successful at growing sweet corn. So I'm really excited to show you what I've learned throughout the years about growing organic sweet corn in the garden, and it actually is pretty simple. Our native soil here in upstate South Carolina is solid red clay, and even after amending it with compost, I was unsuccessful growing corn in it. I wasn't successful until I tried growing corn in raised beds. I've been growing in untreated wooden 4x8 raised beds for the past 10 years until just recently when I've started growing in metal raised beds. I think growing anything in raised beds is a lot easier because you have a lot more control over your soil and there's instant gratification. You can build your raised bed and plant a few days later. Vego sent me 2 of their classic style raised beds so that I can show you how I'm going to be growing corn in them, and I'm going to show you also what I'm going to be planting to grow on this really sturdy trellis. So these are the classic style 10-in-1 raised beds. They are 17 inches deep and there are 10 different configurations. I assembled these so that they're 4x8, which is perfect for growing corn, and there's room for companion plants along the edges of these beds. I absolutely love these raised beds, and I'm really grateful to be able to show you guys how they're working in action in my garden. They're really easy to put together. I assembled them by myself. They come with the tools that you need to assemble them, both the raised beds and the trellis. They're really durable, and I'm really happy with the fact that they're going to last 4 or 5 times longer than my wooden raised beds. If you'd like to read more about Vego garden beds, I put a link in the description. You can check out the materials they're made of, all the different beautiful colors they come in, and all of the accessories that they offer that go along with their garden beds, like this trellis right here, and they have little solar lights that can go on them and all kinds of really cool stuff. I previously made a really detailed video about how I fill my 17-inch deep raised beds, and I did the same thing with these beds. I lined them with cardboard. The only difference is I wanted to show you guys what you can do if you don't have decomposing logs available to put in the bottom on top of the cardboard. I sourced some pine bark nuggets at the local hardware store, and I put those in the bottom 6 to 8 inches deep. Of course, the older the wood, the better. If it has started to decompose, that's the best thing to put in the bottom of your raised beds because the decomposition process is already underway. It's still going to take a while to decompose, but eventually it's going to become a really healthy part of the soil. But you have to do the best that you can do. If you don't have decomposing logs or decomposing wood chips sitting around on your property or easily accessible, these bag nuggets are the next best thing. Corn really likes loose, well-draining soil, and this soil in this raised bed is the same soil that I've used for the past 11 years in all of my raised beds to grow everything. It's from a local business. I know where it comes from, and I know that it doesn't contain any chemicals that are going to harm my plants. It's a mixture of their topsoil and mushroom compost. And in my existing beds that I'm not starting from scratch like this one, I always top with at least 2 to 3 inches of mushroom compost before I plant everything. And the fact that the soil is really healthy really has cut down on the need for fertilizing. I hardly ever fertilize, which is a little bit different for corn because it's a heavy feeder that requires a lot of nitrogen, but I'll touch on that a little bit later in the video. We're in the last couple days of May right now, and here in upstate South Carolina, I could have planted a lot earlier, probably last month, but I didn't. I just got really busy, and here I am, which is fine because our growing season is a little bit longer, and I've planted planted well into June before and had successful harvest. You can plant in the spring when your soil temperature reaches 50 degrees, but that's the absolute minimum, and I would recommend waiting until it's at least 65 all the way on up to 90 degrees. That's a pretty big window, but it's a safe zone. The corn is going to germinate rather quickly that way. You don't have to worry about it rotting that way in cool, moist soils. One of the most important things to think about when you're getting ready to plant your corn is how to space it. It's actually essential in your backyard to plant corn in blocks as opposed to one long row, and that's because of pollination. Corn is wind pollinated, so when it's planted in blocks, it has a lot better chance of successfully pollinating than it does in one long row. Pollinators, of course, help with the pollination process, and when your corn is growing and tasseling, you'll see all kinds of pollinators all over it. But it's primarily wind pollinated, so planting it in blocks like that gives you the best chance of having fully formed ears on your plants. So I've had the best success with planting in 4x8 raised beds. You could even do smaller. I've seen people plant corn in grow bags, 10-gallon grow bags with like 4 to 6 plants growing in each one. 4x4 would work, but I go with 4x8 just because of the way that we eat sweet corn. I usually get about 90 ears out of each bed. So I'm going to be spacing the rows approximately 12 inches apart, with each plant approximately 8 inches apart. If you've shopped for corn seed at all, you've probably noticed that there are so many different varieties to choose from, which is one of the amazing benefits of growing it yourself, because you know that you're not going to find all those varieties in the store or even at farmers markets. And there are probably certain varieties that are bred specifically for your climate, so keep that in mind when you're shopping for corn seed too. For the past 6 years, I've been growing Mirage sweet corn and Who Gets Kissed sweet corn because we absolutely love the flavor of that sweet corn. Mirage is a beautiful white sweet corn, and Who Gets Kissed is a bicolored corn. We just really like the flavor, and I've found that it's done really well in my particular microclimate and garden. This year though, I am trying 2 different varieties because we were at the hardware store and the kids picked these out, and of course I'm going to support their interest in trying different varieties in the garden. So one of the varieties they call unicorn corn. It's called Painted Hill corn, and it's going to have all these beautiful colored kernels, and it's good sweet corn for eating, but they're also beautiful when you dry the ears out for decorating in the fall. And the other one is Honey and Cream, which has a traditional sweet corn flavor, and it's a bicolored corn. I think it's probably going to be kind of like Who Gets Kissed corn. The only difference is this is a hybrid, and Who Gets Kissed is open pollinated. And I should mention too that if you'd like to dry out your ears of corn and save your seeds so that you can grow year after year, it needs to be open pollinated, and that means that it's not hybrid. If you save seeds from a hybrid plant, the following year it's not going to turn out to be like the parent plant. But if you save open pollinated seeds, you're guaranteed that it's going to turn out the same year after year. Honey and Cream is a hybrid variety, and Painted Hill is actually open pollinated, so one thing we might do when we dry some of these for decorating is we'll save some to grow again next year. If you're growing 2 different varieties of sweet corn in your garden, I would recommend staggering the plantings. Like, I'm going to plant one variety today in this bed, and I'm going to plant the other variety next week in the other bed, and that's so that they tassel at different times, and that reduces the risk of cross-pollination. And if you have 2 different varieties that cross-pollinate, you may not end up with the variety that you're going for. Another cool thing that you can do with corn, if you have a long enough growing season and if you plan ahead enough to do it, you can succession plant. So every 2 weeks you're going to plant more seeds, so you have fresh sweet corn to harvest all season long. I usually don't do that just because of the way that we eat it. I plant all my corn at once so that we have one big harvest pretty much, so that I can can it and eat for the whole entire year until we're ready to plant corn again. I'm going to get started planting the first bed here, and I just use the handle of my rake to make my rows. With most sweet corn, you're going to get 1 to 2 ears per plant, and that's been my experience with Mirage and Who Gets Kissed. On average, I got 2 ears per plant, so I had about 90 ears coming out of each 4x8 raised bed. We'll see what happens with Painted Hill, which I'm going to plant right now, and then next week I'm going to plant Honey and Cream in the other bed. You'll also find that each different variety will mature at different times. Like, some are 65 days, some are 80 days, some are 85 days. Painted Hill is 65 to 80 days. The colors are really pretty. I'm going to plant these about 1 inch deep and approximately 8 inches apart, and using this ruler kind of helps me. The companion plants I'm going to be planting on the end, I almost forgot. I almost planted one right here. I'm going to stop about right here because I'm going to be growing some small pumpkins up this trellis on this side, and on the other side I'm going to be growing butternut squash. Other good companion plants that you can plant with corn are pole beans and cucumbers, and I've successfully grown all of those up a trellis on the end of the raised beds before. I'm going to put 2 seeds every 8 inches just because I've never grown this variety before, and I've never grown this variety from this particular brand before, so I'm just going to see how germination goes. I would highly recommend, when you can, to purchase high quality seed because that really helps with the germination rate. And once you figure out a variety that really works well in your garden and you've tested the seeds out and they germinate really well, you can back down to 1 seed every 8 inches or however you're going to space them. Especially if you're going to be saving your own seeds. Starting out with high quality organic seed really sets you up for success for the long term. If you're saving your own seeds from year to year, putting them in Mylar bags will help them last longer, but I've found that if you just put them in envelopes in a cool, dark, dry location, corn seed will usually last for 1 year, maybe 2 or 3 years, and then the germination rate starts to decline. Okay, now I'm going to cover them up, making sure that there's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of soil on top. So I've been purchasing my Mirage sweet corn and my Who Gets Kissed sweet corn seed from High Mowing for the past 5 to 6 years, and I've had really good germination success rate, and the plants end up being really healthy, so I would highly recommend High Mowing organic seeds when you're shopping around. Here are the pumpkin companion plants that I'm going to be planting on the end of this bed. These are just small sugar pumpkins, and I think they're going to climb beautifully up this trellis. So I'm just going to do 2 plants right here, 1 here and 1 here. And I might plant some bush beans in here following the corn. I'm just going to put a couple of seeds. I'm going to go ahead and plant the companion plants in the other bed before I plant the corn next week because I want to get these going. But I'm really excited about these honey patch squash seeds from Row 7 Seed Company. These are actually little butternut squashes. They're little single serving size, and these are going to be delicious, I think. Corn requires at least 1 inch of water per week, and the most important thing to remember is deep and consistent watering, because deep watering helps promote a strong root system and consistent watering helps consistent ear development on the plants. Given that, soaker hoses and drip irrigation really helps, and I'll be installing that soon. I can show you a clip in this video of how I installed it in my wooden raised beds. I'm going to do the same thing here in these metal raised beds. They're really easy to set up, especially when you set up a timer. I like the rain point timer because you can control the exact amount of water that goes in each bed, and it actually has a sensor on it, so when it rains it'll actually halt your preset watering plan, which is pretty amazing and convenient. There's a really easy way to manually with your hand see what your soil feels like, and that's by doing the knuckle test, and you basically just stick your hand down into the soil up to your knuckle. If your fingers kind of come out with soil stuck to them like this and the soil feels like a wrung out sponge, you know that your moisture level is pretty good. You don't want it to be too soggy and you don't want it to be too dry. Obviously, if no soil comes out on your fingers and it feels really dry, then more deep watering is necessary. So now I'm going to mulch really well, and corn requires full sun, so at least 6 to 8 hours of unfiltered sunlight every day. Sometimes, especially when it gets really hot in the summer, the soil can dry out really quickly. Applying a nice thick layer of mulch really helps the soil retain moisture, and it also helps reduce weeds. I use pine straw in my garden. I've just been using it for the past 11 years, and it works best for me because it's really easy to get. I've never noticed it affecting the pH of the soil, so I just keep using it because I like it in my garden, but you can use any kind of natural mulch you'd like. I would highly recommend mulching around every plant in the garden, not just corn, because it really helps save water and weeds, and eventually it will decompose down into your soil. Since corn is a heavy feeder and requires a lot of nitrogen, I wanted to say a couple things really quick about fertilizing. I would highly recommend starting with a soil test. If you've never done it before, you can send it in or take it to your local university extension office and they'll send you a really detailed email. You'll be able to tell if your soil lacks any nutrients and will give you a better idea about how to fertilize. Since corn is a heavy feeder in general and requires a lot of nitrogen, I will side dress with biofish fertilizer. You can find this on Amazon, or I've even used liquid fish emulsion before, and I'll side dress, meaning I'll just make little furrows in between the plant rows when the corn stalks are about a foot high, and then again when they tassel, and that's all. I almost forgot to tell you guys something really important, and that is keeping birds out. I have had a couple of different instances where my corn germinated and it was about this high, 1 to 2 inches high, and I came out the next day and all of the seedlings were just laying on top of the garden soil. And what happened was the birds, they really like those kernels right after they germinate, and they will actually dig them all up and eat the corn and leave the little seedlings behind. So what I do is I use bird netting. I've actually used little bamboo stakes in each of the 4 corners and put plastic cups on top of the stakes to hold the netting up just until the seedlings are at least 6 inches tall, and then you can remove the netting. Just that method of simply installing bird netting will save your seedlings. I've never actually had personal experience with birds going after my full ears of corn growing on, you know, the mature stalks, or squirrels. If that's an issue for you, installing bird netting, you know, the whole time, especially while the ears are developing, might be helpful. As far as disease goes, I've been really fortunate to not have an issue with that, but I know that starting with really healthy soil and really high quality seeds does make a difference. We have had our share of pests, especially with Japanese beetles and worms, and since we're growing organically, I don't like to apply chemicals to control the pests. Especially with Japanese beetles, they're already kind of starting to come out in the garden, and since I'm planting later, I might completely miss out on them. I hope so. But if you do have Japanese beetles in your garden going after your corn, they really like to go after the silk. So I really keep an eye on them when the corn first develops silk, because for the first 5 days after the silk first emerges, that's the really important time window for pollination to happen. So if the Japanese beetles eat the silk after that window, it's not as big of a deal because pollination has already happened. So if the Japanese beetles go after the silk after that important pollination window, it's not as big of a problem. The silk's going to turn brown and fall off anyway, so if the Japanese beetles eat it at that time, it really doesn't matter. But during that time frame, I'll watch really closely and I'll try to get out to the garden as much as I can and just kind of hand pick the beetles. I know it's gross, but if you wear garden gloves, you can hand pick the beetles and put them in a bucket of soapy water, and that takes care of them. Then as far as the worms go, I've never had worms completely destroy all of my corn. The biggest issue I've had is they will eat probably like 1 to 2 inches down from the top, and then the rest of the corn 9 times out of 10 is fine. So when we cook it or when we can it or however we're going to preserve it, freeze it. I prefer canning. Freezing, I don't really like the texture, the flavor of it, but some people love to preserve it that way. Anyways, if you're eating it or preserving it, just cut off the worm damage part. The rest of the corn is perfectly fine and beautiful to eat. I'm just gonna water these seeds in that I just planted. I'm gonna water them in well with my hose, and this is how I'm gonna water them until they germinate and I get my bird netting installed. I'm gonna do that at the same time, install my soaker hoses at the same time as I install my bird netting. After the corn germinates, then I can tell exactly where I'm gonna put the soaker hoses, but with this mulch, it keeps the soil moist enough. I just come out here once a day and kind of top water like this, because in order to germinate, the corn needs warmth and it needs moisture. Okay, so anyways, while I'm watering, I wanted to talk about supporting your corn plants. That's another really important thing, especially if you get high winds in your backyard. I didn't really know this until it happened to me personally, especially growing up in the Midwest. You drive around and you just see miles upon miles of cornfields, so you never see any corn tied up or anything. You don't really even think about it. But in your home garden, even if you plant in blocks, one thunderstorm comes through with high wind and it can totally topple over all of your corn plants. Trust me, it has happened to me. So what I do is I take T-posts and I put them on the edges of my raised bed, and then I just wrap rope around the T-posts in a couple of places as soon as the plants are tall enough, and that ties them together kind of and gives them enough support around the perimeter of the bed so that the wind's not going to break them down or you know, make them totally topple over. But with whatever you have on hand and some rope, you can easily support your corn plants. So to recap, here are 7 simple steps you can take so you can be well on your way to growing delicious organic sweet corn in your own garden. Number 1, planting in healthy soil. Number 2, planting in blocks. Number 3, properly watering. Number 4, adding a good layer of natural mulch. Number 5, since corn is a heavy feeder, properly fertilizing so it gets enough nitrogen. Number 6, properly supporting your corn so windstorms won't take it down. And number 7, watching out for pests like especially birds and worms and Japanese beetles. And don't forget your companion plants. There are several different kinds of plants that go well with corn, like pole beans, cucumbers, and squash, to name a few. If you grow your own garden sweet corn, the one most amazing, surprising thing you are going to notice is the flavor of that corn. I am serious. It is the best flavor you will ever taste, and there is science behind that. After the sweet corn is harvested, the sugars change to starch. So if you eat your sweet corn as soon as possible, or put it in jars, or freeze it as soon as possible after you harvest, you're gonna taste the sweetest sweet corn possible before the sugar has a chance to turn over to starch. And that usually happens after a 2-hour window. So if you can eat your corn immediately following or within that 2-hour window, you're gonna taste the best sweet corn and the sweetest sweet corn you have ever tasted in your whole entire life. And really that goes with any garden food that you grow in your garden, but there's science behind the sweetness of sweet corn and eating it as soon as you possibly can. I know that there are lots of gardeners out there who have grown sweet corn in their gardens for their whole entire lives. So if you have any helpful tips about growing sweet corn in your backyard garden, I would love it if you could share it in the comments below. I've also made some really detailed videos in the past about when the perfect time is to harvest your sweet corn and the visual clues to look for, and also how to pressure can your sweet corn, and I'll link those above if you want to check those out. As always, thank you so much for watching my videos. I really hope that they've been helpful to you, and thank you for supporting my channel. I can't wait for you to join me again in my garden.